Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Jessica Tsur, and I am the founder of CATCH. CATCH stands for Creating a Team of Courage and Hope, and offers in-person, clinician-facilitated support groups for individuals struggling with anxiety and depression. Before I begin, I'd like to welcome my mother, who came all the way from New Hampshire to join us tonight. I'd like to share with you something I read in a book called Furiously Happy. There's something about depression that allows you to explore depths of emotion that most normal people could never conceive of. Imagine having a disease so overwhelming that your mind causes you to want to murder yourself. Imagine having a malignant disorder that no one understands. Imagine having a dangerous affliction that even you can't control or suppress. Then imagine that same often fatal disease being one of the most misunderstood disorders, one that so few want to talk about, and one that so many of us can never completely escape from. When cancer sufferers fight, recover, and go into remission, we laud their bravery. We wear ribbons to celebrate their fight. We call them survivors because they are. When depression sufferers fight, recover, and go into remission, we seldom even know, simply because so many suffer in the dark, ashamed to admit something they see as a personal weakness, afraid that people will worry, and more afraid that they won't. We find ourselves unable to do anything but cling to the couch and force ourselves to breathe. When you come out of the grips of a depression, there is an incredible relief, but not one you feel allowed to celebrate. Instead, the feeling of victory is replaced with anxiety that it will happen again, and with shame and vulnerability when you see how your illness affected your family, your work, everything left untouched while you struggled to survive. We come back to life thinner or heavier, paler, weaker, but as survivors. Survivors who don't get pats on the back from coworkers who congratulate them on making it. Survivors who wake to more work than before because their friends and family are exhausted from helping them fight a battle they may not even understand. I hope to one day see a sea of people all wearing silver ribbons as a sign that they understand the secret battle, and as a celebration of the victories made each day as we individually pull ourselves up out of our foxholes to see our scars heal and to remember what the sun looks like. I celebrate every one of you listening to this. I celebrate the fact that you fought your battle and continue to win. I celebrate that you may not understand the battle, but you pick up the baton dropped by someone you love until they can carry it again. I survived, and I remind myself that each time we go through this, we get a little stronger. We learn new tricks on the battlefield. We learn them in terrible ways, but we use them. We don't struggle in vain. We win. We are alive. My name is Jessica. I am the mother to 5 beautiful children. I am a wife. I have been a teacher for the last 14 years. I am the founder of the Lovely Gemach, which provides clothing to struggling families. And I have been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder. I take medication. I have been hospitalized, and I go to therapy more than once a week. Shame is a topic that no one wants to talk about, and shame is an extremely powerful emotion. Shame is that gremlin that tells us something is wrong, not normal or unacceptable with who we are or what we struggle with. This shame is loud, very loud. It tells us to disengage and hide. In our culture, shame is an epidemic. Just a few short years ago, after spending my 40th birthday in a psychiatric hospital, I decided to take the excruciating pain I was in and turn it into purpose. The night before my first speaking engagement, the organization I was speaking for called to tell me they thought it may be safer for me to share my story in third person, or perhaps have someone else read it. I gave it some serious thought. and asked myself, what would the biggest risk be? I was already married. Was it truly possible that speaking and sharing my story would affect my children's opportunity to find their soulmate? As a mom who truly cares deeply about each and every one of her children, I came to the decision and acknowledgement that we all face struggles at some time: physical, emotional, financial, or marital. The list goes on. No one gets through unscarred. And I want my children to marry someone who has courage and strength to face challenges and difficulties, not hide, not run, and not ignore. And so I chose that evening to begin my journey of vulnerability, because I know the loneliness and isolation of living with a mental illness. And I knew that I wasn't alone. According to Brené Brown, a well-known shame and vulnerability researcher, vulnerability is the willingness to show up even when you cannot control the outcome. And I was willing to take that risk in order to combat the shame within our community. According to Brown, if you put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 things to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. If you put shame in that same petri dish and add empathy, shame loses its power and begins to disappear. So how do we combat shame? We connect, we talk to others with shared experiences, and we create support. The 2 most powerful words when you're in struggle is to hear another say, "Me too." And this, my dear friends, is exactly what Catch is here to do. Through our support groups, individuals come together each week to connect, validate, and support each other. We become each other's cheerleaders. We're there to applaud when someone has accomplished a goal, and we are there to pick each other up when someone feels they are falling. Unfortunately, we cannot take away one another's struggles and pain, but we can be there throughout the journey and replace loneliness and isolation with camaraderie and teammates. Let this evening be a milestone to putting shame to rest, and let's replace it with acceptance, care, connection, and hope. I would like to take this opportunity to publicly thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for being right by my side throughout my journey. Whenever my depression seems to seep in, he sends someone to reach out with their own pain. Men, women, teens, people from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, even Israel and London. When I'm in the throes of my own struggle, he sends someone in need of a listening ear, encouragement, validation, or support. And it happens every single time. When I feel I can't push through or fight through another episode, and he tells me, "Oh, yes, you can. Not only can you, but you can help others through it too." And for that, I am extremely grateful. May we all have the ability to recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even in the depths of our pain. I would now like to introduce Dr. Rachel Lowinger, a clinical psychologist with a private practice in Lawrence, New York. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming this evening. Each and every one of you is very brave for being here tonight. For that alone, you already deserve a round of applause. This is actually my favorite time of year. I love the warmth. It's finally actually warm outside. They said it was spring like a month ago, but now it's actually starting to feel like it. And there's a very special energy in the air this time of year. As we move between Pesach, Yetziat Mitzrayim, and we count the days to Matan Torah, this is a time where we are looking forward to cleanse ourselves from any leftover debris in our personality, in our character. And we're looking forward to remove any obstacles to growth, to connection, to being our best self. So I think this is an excellent time for us to sit here together and to contemplate this topic. I think, I'm not going to take account of hands, but I think we're up to 27. Am I allowed to say the number? Anyways, whoever is still in or not, I think we're up to Yesod Shebenetzach, right? Every day we focus on something. I was hoping it would be shame, but it's not. So nevertheless, we'll just touch on it for a second. So today is Yesod Shebenetzach, and that's this idea of commitment and endurance, the connection between the two, and that we have the ability to endure to different difficult things once we're committed to the cause. So that's one of the many ways that we get through difficult things with commitment and with a sense of purpose. And that's our purpose tonight as well, to see what is it that we can do to remove anything that's getting in our way of serving Hashem, of connecting with our families, with our friends, and of course with ourselves, because we are the one longest relationship that we'll ever have through our lifetime. That's our relationship with ourselves. So that's kind of the foundation for everything else. So let's talk a little bit about shame. What exactly is shame? I think like anxiety, like depression, it's kind of like an umbrella word for a lot of different things. There is small temporary shame, there is long chronic, lifelong shame. Physiologically, if you want to kind of try to visualize what shame is to the body, shame is like a very powerful slam the brakes system, okay? So imagine a sports car kind of like driving down the highway at full speed, and then something happens and bam, you have to slam the brakes with all the bracing and all the shock to the body. That's what shame is to the body. So that looks something like a person is sort of on their way to opening up, to feeling authentic, to expressing maybe a need or a want or a feeling, and something happens and bam, it just doesn't go, and that person sort of recoils and collapses with this sense of, oh, I guess not. I guess this is not welcome here. And that's what starts this sort of brakes system, right, where we have an internal sense of putting the brakes. And it looks a little bit different for everybody. If each one of you takes a moment to think about how shame shows up for you, you'll see that everybody has it a bit different, right? Some of us are self-conscious and we think we want to say something out loud and then we stay quiet. Some of us I myself personally get a bit defensive. If I get defensive, it's probably because the second before I was feeling ashamed deep inside. Some of us, they just cut off that feeling of closeness because they start to feel this feeling of something is not right with me. I can't really fully have myself be vulnerable. So there's lots of ways that shame shows up. Each one of us has it a bit different, but it's always this brake system that puts the brakes on. And if you think about it, I always think about it. Everything that we experience is God-given, and everything in our repertoire of emotions is there for a reason. So the main thing is to know how to use it wisely and use it when it's called for, and also know when we're pressing the brakes and we really should be pressing the gas, right? So why would we have shame? First of all, let's ask ourselves that question. Why do we need brakes on a car? Right? It's a good thing to have. If the car is about to crash, it's a good idea to have a good pair of brakes. And the truth is that as human beings, we sometimes, whoa, my stand is about to start rolling down and I'm going to need the brakes. Not super funny, but true. Okay, so sometimes we get carried away, right? Sometimes our passions, our taivas, should we say, or interests take us down the wrong road, And those are very good moments for us to feel our shame. And by the way, I think it's also good to not be afraid of one's own shame and not get scared of it. Because sometimes it's our best guide to self-reflection and to growth and to becoming, the next 2.0, 15.0, whatever your next model of yourself is. So a good role model for us to look at would be, of course, David HaMelech, right? Who is the greatest of the great, but he's also the quintessential Baal Tshuva. And he is someone who's not afraid to talk about his shame. So he precedes us with this meeting by, I don't know how many hundreds, thousands of years. But he talks about it in a few places. So for example, in Psalms 38, he talks about Hashem's rebuke to him, and he says it feels like arrows that are piercing through his heart. And it feels like a heavy weight upon him. By the way, very somatic experiencing kind of language, right? Not intellectualized, just the way it feels in the body is quite a terrible, terrible feeling. And he's expressing regret about what he's done. I'm assuming it refers to his sin with Bathsheba. He also says that his lovers and his relatives are standing back from him and that they're distancing themselves from him. So he's talking about the same things we're talking about today, right? Isolation, feeling alone, feeling like people are looking down, people are judging. It's interesting to see how David HaMelech handles that. He actually says that he's not going to allow the humiliation of his friends and relatives to get him down, and he's really leaving it to Hashem to do the judging. He's saying Hashem is the one that's going to judge, and Hashem is the one that's going to ultimately redeem him. So I think there's a good lesson here too. Because I think oftentimes when we have internalized shame, we see judgment everywhere, and we're afraid of other people judging us, and we see it there, whether it is there or it isn't there. And I think David HaMelech is teaching us something important there, where he says, even though there's good reason for me to be ashamed, I'm not going to leave it up to people to do the judging. I'm not going to let that humiliate me and drag me down. I'm going to go straight to Hashem, and he's going to be the one that's going to provide the answer. And Hashem will not abandon him even in this time. He will come to my help. So this is a good use of shame. This is why we have the breaks, and this is why we should befriend our shame and not be scared to feel it. And at the same time, of course, we want to differentiate between healthy shame and this kind of more chronic state of feeling internally rotten, which is what we really talk about when we talk about chronic shame, right? And that's, somebody once said, I don't know who because I'm not good with names, but he said, everything I learned about myself, I learned before the age of 5, right? So most of the things that we carry deep inside, our deepest beliefs about ourselves, our deepest feelings about ourselves are oftentimes carved early on, and they just don't get updated, unfortunately. And especially with things that we feel ashamed of, there's even less room to update them, because part of shame, like Jessica said, is keeping the secrecy and keeping it deep inside. And so there's no opportunities for it to get aired out, to get reframed, to get, sort of refreshed. So the way this chronic shame sort of trickles in is usually during early on, could be early childhood, could be adolescence when there's a lot of bullying and social hierarchy stuff that goes on. And the idea is that, children and teenagers are fairly self-centered, for good or for worse, and they internalize everything. The world revolves around them. So it's good because they're great. And when it's bad because they must have done something to deserve it, because they're bad, because they're evil. This sounds so simple, but it's so true, and it's so prevalent, and it's really what we all regress to in a way when we start to feel this shame. It usually comes from these old internalized beliefs that there's something so unacceptable about me, that there's something especially bad about me that's worse than everybody else, that if anybody knew who I really was, then they would reject me automatically. And interestingly enough, everybody has that same exact feeling that it's only them who is that bad and that unacceptable. So welcome to humanity. We're all in the same boat. But it's a very unfortunate and tragic sort of feeling, because it gets locked up inside. It becomes pretty unconscious, and then people start to hide from themselves. People can't face themselves. People start to put the brakes on whenever they start to get close to others. People, have a hard time authentically connecting and really showing others who they are, and therefore they don't feel really loved for who they are because they're not showing who they are. So it really has ripple effects in all areas of life, with our relationships with ourselves, our relationship with our close relatives, children, and our relationship with Hashem, right? And this just came to me now, I didn't prepare it, but Adam and Chava, right? What happens after the sin? They're hiding. Hashem is saying, where are you? Hashem doesn't really need to ask. I think he's pretty much knows where they are. But this is what happens, right? They're hiding from Hashem. They're not able to face Hashem anymore. So it couldn't be more essential to our wellness and to our ability to grow, to be able to work through this. Another example that I gave here, again, very, very classic, but so common, bullying, right? Somebody gets picked on. It's usually the nicest kid in the class. It's usually the Ziskite one, the best of the best. They get bullied, and of course, they leave this experience with a sense of like, there's something wrong with me. I am so defective. I'm so bad. And they can carry that feeling into their 20s and 30s, and, until they're able to really identify it and do the work that they need to do to get through it. So that leads us to the next question, which is the one that we're here for, which is, how do we heal from shame? Can we actually heal from shame, right? Sometimes people get up to that point and they're like, am I really ever going to feel different, right? Can we do this? Can we feel differently? So I would say yes, because I'm a forever optimist, and I do think that we can heal from anything and everything. Sometimes that annoys my patients terribly, but too bad, they're stuck with me. So I think the very first step involves this ability to own it and to start to identify it in oneself. How do I behave when I feel ashamed? How does it show up for me? Is it negative self-talk? Is it hiding in the back of the room? Is it, stopping mid-sentence and saying, never mind? What is it exactly that happens when I feel shame? So I think that's step number one. Step number two is to start to be able to put words to your experience, right? So once we articulate, once we share it with people, then it has less power on us, and I think that echoes what Jessica said just now. I happen to love a movie named Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Has anybody watched it? Nobody? Everybody go home and watch it. It's amazing, really. Like, it's my #1 favorite movie. I'm making all my kids watch it one by one, and we're halfway. Devorah, did you watch it yet? No. Okay, we're not calling out on her, but we're going to watch it. It's an amazing movie. He's an amazing person. And she's here to support me, by the way, so I had to give her a shout out. And there's a scene where, I don't want to ruin it for you too much, but there's a scene where somebody is on their deathbed, they're dying, and there's family members all around, and everybody is, sort of talking about how they're going to go on vacation together and how great it's going to be, and it's very clear that everybody's in denial, and nobody really wants to talk about what's happening right in front of them. Has that ever happened to you? Pesach table, family time, everybody is talking, but nobody's really talking. So Mr. Rogers is sitting there, and he says something, I don't remember exactly how, but, can we talk about death? Can we talk about death? Is that okay? if we talk about what's happening right now, right here. And he says, death is human. It's human. We all go through it. And anything that is human is mentionable. We can say it. And anything that is mentionable is manageable. And it's so true. It's so true. Anything that's mentionable is manageable. If we can say it, if we can feel it, then we can deal with it. We're all in the same boat. So I think that very much speaks to the mission statement of Catch, of bringing people together in a safe place where everybody can sort of take down their facade and their persona and just be real and talk about real stuff and realize that all these beliefs that have haunted them all these years are not as bad as they think, and everybody experiences some degree or some amount of that self-consciousness, of that, discomfort, just being in a body, being a human being, making mistakes, making boo-boos, saying the wrong thing, whatever it is. So that is one path, I think, to healing, and a very, very essential one. And then there's many, right? We're not going to go through all of them because we have Rabbi Shais Taub coming up, and he's going to have a lot of wise words to share with us. But actually, the second way, when I thought of introducing Rabbi Taub, I remembered a conversation that we had. I was about to go and speak with a group called Makom. They're disenfranchised ex-Hasidim, people who have extensive histories of very painful trauma and difficult stories, who are really grappling with the whole concept of God and religion and what it means to them. And it's a very sensitive topic. And I was a little bit afraid, I won't lie, as to how am I gonna defend Hashem? How am I gonna justify the suffering and everything that they've gone through as a religious representative, I guess, of that camp. And I called Rabbi Taub. I don't know if he remembers, and I asked him about it. And I don't know, it was probably pretty strong, but something like, "Are you Jewish?" I'm like, "I think so. Last I checked." He's like, "What do you mean? What are you even asking me?" The only way that we can justify going through anything is if we truly, deeply believe that it's connected to our mission in this world, that nothing that we experience is for nothing. It's not, a cruelty for its own sake. Nothing is gratuitous. No suffering is gratuitous. Everything that we go through is solely for the purpose of being able to fulfill our unique mission. And nobody else in the world can do what you're going to do because of that unique experience that you had, because you were bullied, because you were the one who had to go through a huge financial crisis and face all the people who are looking at you as because you went through these experiences. You are now in a unique position to make to transform the world, to help other people, to become resilient, to become a source of strength, to become somebody who people look up to, not down on. So that's another way to heal from shame, is not to just kind of get rid of it, but to transform it into the exact point of what makes you uniquely you, and what makes you strong, and what makes you shine. So that's really the best medicine that I can think of. And thank you, Rabbi Shais Taub, for reminding me of that. I'm a big copycat of yours, by the way. Just one more thing that I take the freedom to copy. You have a fan club in Lido Beach, half an hour from here. We learn Shara Bitachon based on your podcast. I sit and I transcribe, including the jokes, the funny ones, the half funny ones. The ladies laugh, so I think they're good. And it's been a tremendous source of, because I don't tell jokes like naturally, so I just have to repeat other people's. I just am funny, but I'm not like funny. So anyway, so we enjoy it. It gives us a ton of chizuk. Thank you so much. And with that, please welcome Rabbi Shais Taub.
adjust the mic for me? Okay. It's good? Like this? Yeah? All right. Okay. There's something that I agreed to do up here, and I agreed that I would do it at the end. But I know myself too well, and I'm afraid if I get started, I'll get carried away, and I'll forget to do the thing that I agreed to do. So instead of doing it at the end, I'm going to do it at the beginning, and then you'll just remember that I did it and pretend that I did it at the end. There were envelopes on your chair when you came in. These envelopes are to collect money. This is so that you can be part of the incredible work of Catch, which, again, as it says on the envelope, but I'll read the acronym, creating a team of courage and hope, and that is exactly what they do. They make events such as the one that you're at right now, as well as many other events. And they provide a weekly support group for people who are dealing with depression and anxiety. And they serve as a support to this community in helping us to break down the stigma of dealing with struggles with mental illness such as these. And again, if you want to be part of this work, I mean, by being here at the event, you're already taking part. But if you would like to be part of it also by donating, you can put money in the envelope. I don't see a website, but you'll ask Mrs. Tsur. I'm sure she'll give you the Cash App, the PayPal, the Zelle, and every other. Yeah, we have that. You'll get inside the envelope. I don't see it. It's not in my envelope. Inside the envelope, there's supposed to be other alternate forms of payment. It wasn't in mine, just my luck. Oh, my envelope was empty. There's a pledge card, yes, and it has info in here so that you can donate. Okay. I told Mrs. Tsur before we came on that there's very good energy in this room. I said the people in this room are good people. How do I know? I can feel it. About four or five people said to me in the lobby, I read your column every week. I love your column. So I can tell you a little bit later maybe about my personal feelings about the column. But if you believe that I can dare to give people life advice based on one single email that they sent me, so then you believe that I pick up on things. Right? You don't think I'm smart. It's not that I know how to, it's not like there's a book somewhere that has these answers and I know all the answers in the book. It's a feeling. It's a sense of smell. You know how to sense who you're dealing with. So if you believe that I can do that from an email, then I hope you believe that I can do it in person and I can feel who's in this room. I know I heard actually as I was coming in that there was maybe another event. And I said, that's fine, that's good. Everyone who needs to be here is here. And also we have the miracles of modern technology. There's a video camera back there. By the way, if you want to be internet famous, you can walk back and forth in the aisle. Then you'll be part of the production. If you don't walk back and forth in the aisle, you're going to remain anonymous. If that's how you want it, you decide what level of anonymity you desire. But if you just stay in your seat, you're going to be completely fine. So through the miracles of modern technology, we have people joining us. And there's this thing called the algorithm, but we know Hashem runs the world. So whoever's here tonight and whoever this video ends up reaching, whether it's on YouTube or anywhere else, there's a reason why this message reached you. We're here tonight to talk about shame, breaking down the stigma of shame, and specifically shame surrounding battles with mental illness such as anxiety and depression. So, okay, I mentioned earlier that people in the lobby told me they liked the column. So I just want you to understand, I don't know what context you know me in. If you know me as the column guy, that's more of like a role that I play. Everything I say, I 100% believe, but not everything I believe do I say in that column. You understand there's a certain filter on over there? So everything I'm saying, I mean it, but I'm not giving you the full, okay, over here is much less filter. And to tell you the truth, that's how I would prefer people to get to know me. So if you are one of those people who knows me from the column and you want to like graduate to the more authentic, raw Shais Taub version, just come learn with me on SoulWords or on YouTube or wherever else my classes are uploaded. But so here you're going to get a very raw version, and I don't want you to feel like this is a bait and switch, but I'm going to share with you some of what my thoughts are on this issue. First of all, why is this happening now? I'm saying, like, at this point in history, why is this the call of the hour? Why didn't this happen in previous generations? And you could even argue, if it's so important, why did it never happen before? What's the it? People becoming honest about our personal struggles, taking on the stigma and trying to normalize the fact that we all have challenges. Why is that happening now? So I'll tell you my theory. One theory is a pretty simple theory, which is that in previous generations, they simply did not have the luxury to deal with this stuff. They were running for their lives. So survival was front and center on the agenda, and it wasn't so much about get in touch with your feelings and figure out who you are, and are you happy? Do you have a good marriage? Like, we don't have time for that. We're running. So that's one answer, and it's a simple answer, and I think it's easy to accept. But then there's another answer, and it's not in contradiction to the previous answer. I think they actually dovetail rather well. I think they're really the same concept, just maybe two levels of the same concept. And that is, if you think about the fact that the Jewish people were sent here on a mission, we have a job. And we are driving at something. We're trying to perfect the world, perfect ourselves, perfect the world. I mean, it's really one and the same thing. It's the microcosm and the macrocosm, the inner and the outer, but it's all about a mission of revealing godliness in ourselves and in the world around us. And it sometimes is it's a dirty job, grappling with the realities within ourselves and around us, but the mission ultimately is to create a pure, clean, holy, godly self and world, and that's what we believe in. That's what Mashiach is. Mashiach is this world in a purified state, and each and every one of us as individuals in our purified state. So if that's what's happening, you could kind of understand it like this, like we're at a new level of the cleaning process. We're doing some deep cleaning that previous generations didn't do because that wasn't their job. Their job was to survive. And to survive in spite of whatever emotional challenges they may have had, and to figure out how to make it work, to strong arm it, to make it work. And they are heroes. They did make it work. And if they didn't do what they did in order to survive and have a next generation, we wouldn't be here to do the the work that we're doing. So we owe them a debt of gratitude, and I think it's very, very important that when we're embracing the special mission of this generation, of getting in touch with the deeper emotional healing, that we never do that in a manner of denigrating the heroism of previous generations. Because if they hadn't survived and done what they did, we wouldn't be here to do what we're doing. But they devoted themselves to proving that the Jewish people could survive anything. And not only to survive, but to thrive. And thriving for them meant we are still here, we're in our bodies, in the physical world, and we can even do it with class, with dignity. That's where a lot of the previous generations, I'll use the word balabatischkeit, comes from. Where does that neurosis about the balabatischkeit, about the matching outfits, and the 4-course meals, and the dinner on the table, and that illusion of like having double-digit number kids and being like Better Homes and Gardens, housekeeping, and like doing it all. Where does that come from? That's the defiance against Stalin and Hitler, Yimach Shemam. The previous generation said, we're going to survive, we're going to have homes, and they're going to be nice, well-appointed homes, nice furniture, and everything's going to be, our children are going to be dressed nice and bathed, and dinner on the table, and that balabatischkeit was their defiance to show we can hold it together and we can have functional lives. And they're heroes for doing it. Now, were they dealing with their inner emotional world? No, they weren't. They weren't. They left that for us to deal with. And I don't say that with a hint of resentment. I just think every generation has its calling. And now here we are, and we're left to do this deep cleaning, this final deep cleaning, to look inside and to really, really ask some serious questions that previous generations didn't have the time, the luxury, the safety to afford to be able to consider. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said famously, or at least famous to those who followed the Rebbe's sichos, that especially in the later years, in the last sichos, where the Rebbe was speaking a lot about Mashiach, the Rebbe said that we're now in an era of Der Achrein shel Golus v'der Rishin shel Geula, the last generation of the exile and the first generation of the redemption. And I thought a lot about that, why the Rebbe calls it a Dor, why he calls it a generation. Like in the Rambam and Mishnah Torah, when he talks about Mashiach, he calls it Ba'isei Hazman, he calls it a Zman, an era. Or in Gemara, in Mishnah, it calls it Yemeis HaMashiach, the days of Mashiach, which again is like a time, a unit of time. And the Rebbe referred to it as a dor, as a generation. And I thought a lot about that, and it only dawned on me recently the significance of that term generation. What's a generation? A generation isn't just a unit of time. In fact, it's actually a very poor measurement of time because it's kind of vague how much time is a generation. But a generation, what it really describes is parent-child. That's a generation, parent-child. So if we say we're in the last generation of exile and the first generation of redemption, what do we mean? We mean we're in a funny time. We're in the cusp between the last time parents will parent their children from an exile paradigm and the first time where parents will parent their children from a redemption paradigm. What's an exile paradigm and a redemption paradigm? I don't have to tell you that the exile has been difficult. When I say exile, I don't just mean the geopolitical sociopolitical conditions of the exile from our land and the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Yes, obviously, that's the most concrete manifestation of exile. But what we really mean is a world where godliness is hidden and horrors can happen, not just on a grand scale, but more poignantly on an individual scale. And we struggle and we don't find the tools within ourselves to cope. And we have to figure out a way to survive. And we come up with these coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms, in order to live another day. And that's what exile is. Exile is really that we're living in dysfunction, in global dysfunction, and trying to survive in spite of it. And we take on these adaptations in order to survive in a harsh, cruel world, or a world at least that seems harsh and cruel because we don't see godliness in a revealed way, or at least you have to be super refined in order to see the godliness, but the default is you don't see it. So you feel like you're in a very scary, unpredictable world. And how do you survive there? You take on these adaptations, these coping mechanisms, these defense mechanisms, and you learn how to be bigger, badder, tougher, meaner than the exile that is threatening you. And then you're supposed to turn around and be a loving spouse and a loving parent. You think you just hang that stuff up when you walk through the door. So we figured out how to survive in a dysfunctional world, but at the cost of taking on a lot of maladaptations. And again, I say this without any judgment upon the previous generations because they did what they had to do to survive. And when I say a defense mechanism, I literally mean defense, like they kept themselves alive by not dealing with certain stuff they just couldn't afford to deal with. They couldn't afford to deal with it. And they had to be meaner and tougher, and they had to be detached from their emotions, and they couldn't cuddle, or they didn't know how to be warm in a supportive way. They couldn't figure out that balance. And again, no judgment. But now we're entering into a new era where we're the first generation to start to say, we're going to raise our children with the love, the compassion, the courage, the strength that comes from knowing that we live in God's world, that we are safe, we are loved, we're taken care of, that very soon this world is going to be a home for Hashem, a dira loy yisbarach b'tachtainim. It's going to be a dwelling place in the lower realms. And that this world will become holier than heaven to the extent that souls in the highest heavens in Gan Eden are going to take a U-turn from all their elevations and they're going to come back into the physical world through the resurrection, which is one of the 13 principles of faith. So what does that mean? That the resurrection is going to happen? It means that this world is about to become the highest level of reality. So think about what that means is we're going from this world being such a harsh, scary place, and we're about to have this world become a place where God is revealed. There's a lot of upheaval. That's why also this time of history is compared to Erev Shabbos. Mashiach is Shabbos. Right now we're in Erev Shabbos. You ever visit a Jewish home on Erev Shabbos? So, yeah, that's why things are a little bit crazy, a little bit frenetic. So we're in the Erev Shabbos mode. And in fact, it's so close to Shabbos, we're already tasting from the kugel. We're already tasting from the kugel. You know what that means? It means we can already let go enough of what the exile did to us, those defense mechanisms that we thought we needed in order to be safe. And we can put ourselves into Hashem's loving hands and literally translate Amunah and B'tachon into being more loving with our children, with our spouse, with our neighbors. So it's a very, very special time we're in. And part of what's happening is that we are sort of cataloging. We're doing some Pesach cleaning out the closet, and looking at the remnants of some of the dysfunction that we're saying goodbye to. And it's funny, we don't know where these cycles began. We don't know which ancestor's trauma began a cycle like this. But we get to choose when it ends, that it ends with us. And specifically, in keeping with the theme for tonight, one of the cycles, or the cycle that I'm really focused on, is the cycle of shame and secrecy, of bearing our struggle in isolation. And that's a very, very strong cycle and a very difficult one to break when that's very embedded within you, that there's almost like this code of silence. And how dare you? What a betrayal it would be if you were to be vulnerable and honest, right? It's so ingrained. And so as we're breaking these cycles, what's happening is we are, like I called it, cleaning out the closet. A lot of the garbage is strewn out over the floor of the front room. And it looks very, very dirty and maybe even a little bit chaotic and scary. But the reality is that we're in the middle of cleaning and things are getting better. I think that's one of the misunderstandings, that there's a learning curve. And when you're doing something new, you're not good at it at first. You're awkward at it. And I know just in my lifetime, seeing when our community first started to be honest about our struggles, at first, it often came out in awkward ways. When you're repressed for so long, and then finally you become honest, sometimes you blurt things out that you regret, and you have what they call a vulnerability hangover the next morning. Because it's like you hold on to it so tightly for so long, and then you say, this can't go on, we can't keep doing, and then just let it out, and then it comes out sloppy. And we have to forgive ourselves for that, because like I said, it's a learning curve. But yeah, I can just think of many, many examples in the past 10, 15 years where we were learning how to be honest and vulnerable as a community. We weren't yet good at that skill, and it did come out in a sloppy way. Doesn't mean it wasn't the right direction, it just means we were learning. So now we're a little bit more gentle, a little bit more careful how we do it. There's no rush. Time takes time. It's a healing process. You can't force it. But we're being honest, and we're taking an honest look at things and saying, is this really how I want to be? Just because this is how it was done by my parents or my grandparents or my great-grandparents doesn't mean this is the way it needs to continue. And there are a lot of cycles like that I could talk about. But again, I want to focus really on one cycle, the cycle of shame and secrecy. It's unfathomable. We don't really even think about what our ancestors went through. We clean it up. When we talk about the history, we talk about we can talk about the fact that our ancestors were murdered. There's something almost like noble about that. But there's a lot of the trauma we don't even acknowledge. We don't acknowledge the extent of the sexual abuse and how that affected us. That's just one very clear example. But again, I'm not saying that we have to go out and go to the opposite extreme and become shameless as a response to having been shameful. I'm saying that we need to learn how to reclaim our dignity and to look with honesty and fearlessness at some unpleasant things, and to understand, maybe not exactly how it started, but to understand with a certain degree of compassion why it started. I understand why this cycle started. I understand it was a survival mechanism. I understand it was my ancestors doing what they had to do in order to preserve their sanity. But that was then, this is now. And we're unpacking all this stuff without fear. And if we kind of look at it like the bookends of history, I think it's helpful. You know, if this is like the final chapter, then it has to sort of be the resolution of the original episode. So it's helpful to look at the beginning in order to understand the end. What's the beginning? The beginning goes back way, way further back even than the Jewish people. I mean, the real beginning, in the beginning, is the 6 days of creation. And shame became part of the human psyche at the very end of the 6th day. Right before Shabbos, actually. We almost made it. If we would have made it to Shabbos without shame, that would have been Mashiach. It would have been the perfection of the world. What happened? So Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, were created. And on the same day they were created, they were told, you've got one job, don't eat from this tree, don't eat from the fruit of this tree, called the Eitz Hadas, Toiv Vera, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what did they go and do? They ate from the tree. And what was the first symptom, immediate symptom, of having eaten from that tree? Was shame. Hashem asked them, where'd you get those clothes? All right, they made clothes for themselves out of fig leaves, which is, according to the opinion, that the Eitz Hadas itself was a fig. So they took from the tree itself that was part of their downfall, and they turned it into clothing. And they said, we didn't want to be naked. And Hashem said, who told you you were naked? What, they were fools? It says Adam HaRishon was going around naming all the animals. And naming the animals, you know, anybody can make up a word for an animal. No. He was naming the animals because he could see in each created being the letters of the 22 letters of Aleph Beis, which were formulaically combined in order to bring into being the life force, the channels of energy of divine speech that enliven, that speak into being each individual being. So Adam HaRishon was able to look at the world and see its source in heaven and how those channels of divine life force were coming down. Come on. And he didn't know he was naked. He knew he was naked. He didn't attribute any particular meaning to it. It didn't have any personal meaning. It's like when we were kids and we wanted to tease each other. We learned a big word, so we used it to make fun of each other. We'd go up to some other kid and say, your epidermis is showing. Your epidermis, your skin, your epidermis is showing, right? Your epidermis is showing. So for Adam and Chava to be completely naked would be about as embarrassing as your epidermis is showing. Yeah, so what? The Rebbe once said that before the tree of knowledge, a person would be as embarrassed of his reproductive organs, of that part of his body, as he is of the arm upon which he wraps tefillin. In other words, zero embarrassment. No embarrassment. Why should you be embarrassed? You're exactly as God made you. Embarrassment, shame, is the introduction of what we call hargoshes atzmei, self-consciousness. Self-consciousness. What is self-consciousness? Consciousness of self. Doesn't sound so bad, does it? Self-conscious doesn't sound so bad. Where I end and where the world begins. I am an entity. I exist. Well, you have to understand that previously, Adam and Chava, and therefore all of humanity, they were all of humanity, had nothing but God consciousness, which included themselves. They were viscerally connected to the idea, intuitively connected to the idea of Hashem's oneness. They did not feel like anything separate from Hashem. Like a light that's shining on the floor doesn't feel separate from the light bulb, which is its source. It's just one continuity. And when you feel completely at one with Hashem, and really at one with everything, there's no shame. Shame is the differentiation of the ego. The awareness of self as discrete and distinct from oneness. I know that sounds very lofty and philosophical, but sometimes it's helpful to get deep. I'm going to have to do it sooner or later. That's the job of this generation. So sooner or later, we're going to have to name these things with their proper mystical terms. What we're talking about is the feeling, the disturbing feeling of God separation, of wanting to be at one with the all, and instead feeling I'm this separate entity unto myself. And the symptoms of that condition manifest themselves variously, but in more relatable terms, perhaps, we might describe it as that lingering feeling of always wanting to be a part of and instead feeling apart from. Lonely in a crowded room. Terminal uniqueness. Nobody could understand my story. And if I told them, they'd all leave me. So we operate in this mode of separation, autonomy, where we are separate from each other, separate from God, and ultimately separate from our own true selves. That is the source of shame. And ironically enough, it's also the byproduct. It's a cycle. Shame creates the feeling of separateness as much as shame is created by the feeling of separateness. How shame creates separateness, I don't think I have to tell you. I think everybody understands that the chief symptom of living with a secret is detachment from others, detachment from reality itself, that your world becomes increasingly smaller, a feeling of disconnection, isolation. And so we go through life burdened with whatever we're already burdened with, because we all arrived on the scene here, like I said, with a whole backstory. And then, as if it's not enough that we have to deal with whatever that we've been saddled with, whatever challenges Hashem has chosen for us, but then we have to do that alone. Terribly, terribly alone. And I want to call attention to something that I probably shouldn't, and that is, if you will look at who showed up tonight, it is predominantly women. And I think there are many reasons for that, but one reason is because even showing up to an event like this is a statement, is an act of resistance against shame. And I'm not asking for pity for men, because being a man myself, sometimes it can come off that way when I speak about men's needs. It sounds like I'm apologizing or advocating or excusing men's poor behavior and asking for an exemption, but I just want to call attention to the fact that as hard as it is for women to show up, but Baruch Hashem, there's almost a full room here, for men, that survival mechanism of secrecy is so heavily embedded. So men can't even show up to an event like this by and large. Can't even show up to an event and be seen seated at an event like this. You think they're telling their best friend about their actual struggles? They're not. And it's a very, very heavy load to carry. And just because a person deals with a lot of people and interacts with a lot of people doesn't mean that they have even one person in their life that they can confide in, or that they feel they can confide in. So there's this heavy, heavy, heavy secrecy. It is born from the feeling of separation, that I am different, and it breeds more of the feeling that I am separate, I am different. And so what is the antidote to shame? If shame is separation, the antidote to shame is connection. Relationships. Which is why we heal each other. Which is a funny concept. You would think you go to the expert for healing. How do a bunch of amateurs heal each other? Especially, they're not just amateurs, if they have any degree of personal experience, understanding, and relating to each other's problems, then it's basically what derisively it's called the blind leading the blind. It's a bunch of people with the same problem. They're going to help each other. And yet, what do we see? The greatest agent of healing is the feeling of connectedness. And by the way, even with the expert, even with the clinician, the professional, what makes the professional effective? I'm going to reveal something to you. It's not their training. It's not their expertise. It's not what letters they have after their name. It's not what modality they use. What makes the professional effective is the relationship with the client. One of the fathers of modern psychology, Carl Rogers, said that basically the modality of therapy is almost insignificant, that what it comes down to is the therapist's unconditional positive regard for the patient. Unconditional positive regard. That's fancy talk for I can tell you my story, my whole story, and you won't lose respect for me. That's what it means, unconditional positive regard. I can tell you my whole story, and I can still look you in the eye. And that's what makes the professional effective. So the same thing that makes the professional effective is what makes the amateurs effective as well. Except in a certain way, the amateurs have the added advantage of being able to say, yeah, that happened to me too. And I'll tell you another one. Oh, wow, that's even worse. All right, I didn't tell you my whole story before. Now that you told me yours, let me tell you mine. Oh, you're right, that is even worse, but I didn't tell you my whole story. Then I got something even worse. And then finally they get it all out on the table, and nobody dies of embarrassment, and maybe even they're laughing, like they say, it's hysterical because it's historical. It's in the past. And that's so healing. The feeling that we're not alone in our struggle. That is the antidote, the very mirror opposite of shame. In other words, in my darkest place, I'm not alone. It was my darkest place that made me feel separate from humanity, the rest of my family, the image that I project to the public. And now my darkest place is a common language I have to share with some of the greatest people I know. I'll tell you a story. It's kind of a long story, but usually stories you can get away with telling long stories because people like stories. We just learned in Pirkei Avos, by the way, that kol mi shechochmase meruba al ma'asav, anyone who has more chochma than ma'asav means his actions, then chochmase, his wisdom, eina miskayemes, it doesn't last. But if he has more ma'asav, he has more action than chochma, then chochmase miskayemes, then his wisdom will last. So I once heard a word that maise also is a story. Maise means action, but it also means a story. Maise is to tell a maise, tell a story. So anyone who has more chochma, more wisdom, than he has stories, it's not miskayemes, you're going to forget his wisdom. But if he has more stories than wisdom, then you'll remember the wisdom too. So I'll tell you a story. Before the Baal Shem Tov's passing, he gathered his students and he gave each one of them different jobs. And there was one Talmud, one disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, he gave him the job that after my passing, you should go around and you should tell Baal Shem Tov stories. That's what you should do. Just go around and tell Baal Shem Tov stories. Any story. It doesn't have to be a story that you were there for, although he was there. This disciple, Rabbi Yankiv, was his name, but Rabbi Yankiv was personally present for many Baal Shem Tov stories as a student of the Baal Shem Tov, but also he knew many, many stories. In fact, he was the world expert on Baal Shem Tov stories. So this was his job. And he used to travel around telling these stories. He'd come to a town and he would charge whatever he would charge. They'd pay him a ruble to tell stories for a day, and then he would travel to the next town, and this is before they didn't have the internet, so people were bored, so he'd pay a guy to tell stories. So he was traveling like this for years, and it was kind of getting tiring. He was kind of getting bored of traveling around telling Baal Shem Tov stories. He wanted to settle down, but really, this was how he made a living at this point, so he couldn't really stop. And then he heard the craziest thing. He heard that there was a wealthy Jew who would pay an exorbitant fee for each and every Baal Shem Tov story that he was told. Like, people had gone there and made out like bandits. They would go there and tell 10 stories, and he'd give them a big gold coin for each story. So he said, if that's the case, I'm the world's expert in Baal Shem Tov stories. I have an encyclopedic knowledge of all the Baal Shem Tov stories. I'll go to this guy, I'll tell him thousands of stories, make thousands of gold coins, and I'll retire. So Rabbi Yankiv goes to this, he finds out where this wealthy Jew lives. He lives on some estate somewhere, and he finds where he lives, and he travels. Takes him a while to get there. And he presents himself, and he says, my job is telling Baal Shem Tov stories. I think I'm your guy. And this wealthy Jew is the lord of the manor, says, perfect, excellent. You're going to be my Shabbos guest, and tonight at the meal, we're going to honor you to tell a Baal Shem Tov story. I'm very excited that you're here. Okay, so they set him up at the head of the table, and the balabos, the owner of this estate, gets up and says, we want to welcome Rabbi Yankiv, who was one of the students of the Baal Shem Tov and the world's foremost expert in Baal Shem Tov stories. And Rabbi Yankiv, tell us a story. And everybody looks at Rabbi Yankiv, and he freezes. He can't say a word. And then he looks at the host and he says, I can't remember a story. I'm sorry, I can't remember a story. And the host is very gracious about it. He says, Yankiv is tired from his travels. Tomorrow at the meal, he'll tell us about Shem Tov's story. And then he smoothed it over like, nothing awkward just happened. Next day, at the day meal, the host says, Yankiv is here, and now he's going to grace us with a Baal Shem Tov story. Go ahead. Yankiv gets up. I'm sorry, I can't remember a single story. It's not a problem, Rabbi Yankiv. You're still tired. You'll rest. You'll tell a story at Shalosh Shudas. Tried then, same thing happens. Malava Malka, same thing happens. Sunday brunch, same thing happens. Goes on like this until Tuesday. Every opportunity Rabbi Yankiv has to tell about Shem Tov story, he freezes. He cannot even remember the beginning of a single story. So eventually, humiliated, he goes to the host and he says, I don't know what's going on, but it's not happening. And the host says, I understand. I don't fault you. It's fine. I'm going to arrange a carriage to take you to the city. They lived out, in the countryside in this big manor. So my coach will take you to the city, and from there you'll be able to arrange transportation. So Rabbi Yankiv gets in the coach, and the horse starts galloping. They're riding away, and he looks in the back in the distance, and he sees that this manor where he had just spent the past 4 or 5 days is getting smaller and smaller behind him as they travel down the road. And he sees the Jew, the wealthy Jew who's the host, is standing there sort of watching him off, and he's getting smaller and smaller in the distance. And they go over the ridge, like they dip down, where now, if you look back, you can't see the manor anymore because it's behind the horizon. So now they've disappeared out of the sight line. And all of a sudden, Rabbi Yankiv yells at the driver. He says, turn around, go back, as fast as the horses will take us. Go back now. I remembered a story. They turn around, come back to the manor. He jumps out, he runs inside, he finds the wealthy Jew, the lord of the manor. He says, I remembered how one begins. Let me start, or I might forget it too. Okay, go ahead. He says, okay, I'm just going to start. I don't even remember the ending, but I got to start. I'm going to start. He says, yes, start. Go ahead, start. He says, okay, the story was, it was Matzah Shabbos. It was right after Shabbos, and this happened a lot of times. I was there. It was one of the stories of Baal Shem Tov where I was there. It happened to me. It was after Shabbos. The Baal Shem Tov said to me, let's go, Rabbi Yankiv, let's go. And I got on the coach, and we did this many times. And we got on the coach, and we had kfitzas haderech. We had a miraculous shortening of the way, and we would go crazy long distances in short amounts of time, so I have no idea how far we went, how many lands we traveled across, and it was dark, it was night, it was Matzah Shabbos, and I just know that the horses were flying and we were going fast, and it was Sunday morning when we arrived at this strange land, I don't know what country it was. It was a foreign country. I didn't recognize the people and the dress and the style of the buildings. I knew it was a foreign country. And we were in the Jewish quarter, and I saw there was a scaffolding and a stage, and I wasn't sure what this is, but I looked around and there was no one in the street. It was like a ghost town, and the Baal Shem Tov led me to a particular house. We knocked on the door, and nobody answered. There was a mezuzah. It was a Jewish house. We knocked on the door, and nobody answered. And then finally the Baal Shem Tov says, I order you to open up. This is Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. And a woman from behind the door said, I can't open the door. Don't you know that the bishop is out there right now, and he's going to build a fire, and he's going to burn a Jew at the stake. It's Easter Sunday. This is his cruel custom that he does every year. I dare not open the door. The Baal Shem Tov says, open the door right now. And she opened it, and they came inside, and then she closed it and locked it right behind them. And Rabbi Yankov says, so we were inside the house, and the Baal Shem Tov then said to me, Rabbi Yankov, I want you to go to the platform, and I want you to tell the bishop that Yisrael Baal Shem Tov is here, and that I would like to speak with him. So I opened the door, and the woman started screaming, don't open the door, don't open the door. I was able to get out. She locked it behind me, and I understood it was very dangerous. I also understood the Baal Shem Tov had given me orders, so you just do as you're told. And I walked up to the platform, and I saw there was this bishop there. I saw him, and he was directing people, workers, and he was getting this pyre ready, and I'd been told what he was doing. I understood his fiendish plot. And I said to him, Yisrael Baal Shem Tov is here and would like to see you now. And Rabbi Yankov was telling the story, and he's saying, and so I remember the bishop said to me, tell the rabbi I will be there in half an hour. And I walked back, and again, the woman didn't want to answer the door, and then she opened the door, and I squeezed my way in, and then I said to the Baal Shem Tov, the bishop says he'll see you in a half an hour. And the Baal Shem Tov said, no, tell him he'll see me now. So again, we had to open the door, and the woman was frightened, and I walked across the street, and I walked up to the platform, and I said to the bishop, no, the Baal Shem Tov will see you now. And miraculously, no harm came to me. The bishop got down off the platform, and he walked with me to the house. Of course, this time when the door opened, the woman fainted, seeing the bishop there. And the bishop looked at the Baal Shem Tov. Rabbi Yankov was telling the story to this wealthy Jew. He says, the bishop looks at the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov says to the bishop, I want to speak to you in the other room. There was another room, a side room, like a storage room, and they went in there privately. And they were there for a long time. Could have been hours. I don't remember what happened after that. I don't remember if he came out. I don't remember if I saw the bishop again. I don't remember us traveling back. I'm sorry, I don't remember the end of the story. And so this wealthy Jew, the lord of the manor, says to Rabbi Yankov, you really don't recognize me. Rabbi Yankov says, I'm sorry, I don't. The host says, I was the bishop. He says, you're Jewish. He says, let me tell you the rest of the story you don't know. I grew up a regular Jewish boy, went to Cheder, and maybe I was a little bit too smart for my own good. I was very talented, and I always felt kind of special. And I didn't think people appreciated my talents. And I got a resentment. and I carried a chip on my shoulder. And then one day, the church was trying to win Jewish souls, and I started talking to this priest, and he flattered me and told me how smart I was, and I felt very good that somebody recognized how smart I was, and I saw this as an opportunity to finally be recognized. And what do you know? I climbed the ranks, and I went from priest to Monsignor to bishop. He says, but of course they all knew about my past, so to prove that I was one of them, what did I have to do? I had to become the most virulent anti-Semite, and I developed this custom, this practice of publicly torturing a Jew every Easter, burning him alive at the stake. And I did this for years. And I knew it was wrong. But I was stuck. I couldn't get out of it. And I rationalized it. I had all types of arguments, how I could live with myself. And after years of this, one night I had a dream. It was the night before I was supposed to do this terrible thing again. And I woke up, and I remembered my dream, that I saw my soul being judged in the heavenly court, and that the angel who was presiding said that there is no redemption for this soul who has caused so much anguish and destruction, that took so many innocent lives. There's no redemption for this. And I saw the souls of my ancestors looking very dour, and they had nothing they could say to defend me. They looked ashamed. And then all of a sudden, I saw this holy rabbi, and he said, I, Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, will take responsibility for this soul's rectification. He says, I woke up, and I knew it was more than a dream. I knew that I would meet this Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov very soon, and that whatever he would do, I would have to listen, because he was going to help me somehow redeem my past. So I got up in the morning, and what can I do? I mean, they had already built the platform in the middle of the Jewish quarter, and I went there, and I started building the pyre and instructing the workers how to get everything ready for this terrible display. And then I saw you, Rabbi Yankov, I saw you. And you said, Yisrael Baal Shem Tov is here, he wants to see you now. And I knew it was true because that was my dream. I told you wait a half an hour because I needed to just finish the job one last time. And then you came back and you told me no. The Baal Shem Tov says now. And I realized that there would be no last time. That this was it. And that I had to follow you. And I followed you into that house. And that woman fainted, and we went into that small storage room. And the Baal Shem Tov spoke to me for hours. And he told me the bottom line was that I could redeem myself. I would have to secretly sell all of my possessions, liquidate all of my assets, with a third of my treasures anonymously donated to the Jewish community that I had caused so much destruction in. The other third, I should bribe the church to look the other way while I escape in the middle of the night. And the other third I should keep and use that third to rebuild my wealth and to have a life, which I did. And you see, I'm wealthy. And I asked the Baal Shem Tov, if I do all of this, how will I know that my teshuvah is really accepted? How will I know that it worked? How will I know that the process is finished, that it's culminated, that I can rest? And the Baal Shem Tov told me, very simple. When you hear your own story told by somebody else, you'll know that your process of return has finished and that everything has been cleaned and healed. So he says, what do you think I did? I paid people for every Baal Shem Tov story. Because every Baal Shem Tov story I heard, I was hopeful that would be the time I would hear my story. Baal Shem Tov said, when I hear my story told by somebody else, that will be my healing. And every time they would come in, they would tell a different Baal Shem Tov story. And heartbroken, I would pay them, but with humility, I accepted the fact, apparently it's not time yet. Apparently it's not time. And so with hope, I would wait for the next person to come with new Baal Shem Tov stories, and it was never the time. And when you showed up, Rabbi Yankov, I recognized you immediately, and I knew this was it because you were there. You didn't just know that story, you lived that story. And I was ready. This was it. And then Friday night, when you couldn't remember a single story, I understood what was happening. It wasn't time yet. And I accepted that. I really accepted that. And Shabbos day, and Shabbos afternoon, and Motzei Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I accepted that. And when I saw you go over that hill, and your coach disappeared out of sight, I put myself in Hashem's hands. And I said, Hashem, as you will. As you will. I understood there would never come a chance again that the one person in the world who knew this story was going to appear. Again, I surrendered. I said, Hashem, as you will. And at that moment of surrender, I saw the coach turn around and come back over the hill, and you ran to me. And the minute you started blurting out that story, I knew which story it was. That was my story. And I want to thank you because now I know that I've healed. It's a long story. But I told you this story for a reason. We live in shame and secrecy, in isolation, feeling separate, feeling that nobody could know our true story. We can't afford to allow them to even guess about our true story. And I don't want to hear you say, well, there's nothing shameful about mental illness. If you're struggling with depression and anxiety, it's just a diagnosis. Okay, I just want to say something. I hope you'll forgive me. But, okay, sure, you're right. You're right. There is no moral stigma. Truly, there's no moral stigma having depression any more than having cancer. That's true. But let's be honest. When somebody has depression and anxiety, there are a lot of things they end up not being able to do that they carry a lot of guilt for. Let's not sugarcoat this. So it's not just the shame that I can't tell people my diagnosis. It's the shame, do they know how I fell short as a mother, as a husband, as a coworker, as a neighbor, as a Jew? So there's a lot of moral guilt. Don't pretend there isn't. A lot of things that we do when we're in pain to try to get relief, or things that we don't do when we're completely exhausted and we just don't have energy to do anything. So there is a lot of moral guilt. And so we live in the shame and the isolation of that secrecy. I can't tell people how poorly I've been functioning. I can't tell them the full extent of it. I can't tell them. And then one day, you decide it's not a choice anymore. I don't have the luxury to keep this a secret anymore. I've got to tell somebody. And if you're fortunate, you find the right people, trustworthy people, empathetic people, non-judgmental people, and you tell them your story and you don't die of shame and embarrassment. But when does the full healing occur? When you hear your story told by somebody else. Maybe the details are slightly different. Maybe the exact dates and times are changed. But the things that you thought were uniquely disgusting and unmentionable about your story, you hear somebody else who you love and respect saying the same exact thing happened to me. And another person, and another person, and another person. Happened to me, happened to me. That also happened to me. We heal when we hear our story told by somebody else. So the fact that something exists in our community, like Catch, where there are weekly support groups, where people can share and have the opportunity, encounter a high likelihood, indeed, of hearing parts of their story that they couldn't bear to tell anyone, now not only heard from them, but then to hear it back. To hear it back. That itself is the deepest healing. And so what I want to challenge all of you with is the following. You may have time left before you get so desperate that you have to share your story. Meaning you're still holding it together. The neighbors don't know your story yet. Possible. But it could be there's somebody else who desperately needs to hear your story now. They don't have another minute. And they need to hear your story because your story is their story. And when they hear you say it and stand before them alive and well, a survivor, this is the greatest gift and the deepest healing that you can provide for them. So I know it's a big challenge, and I spoke about the learning curve earlier. When we're doing something new, we don't always do it with the utmost grace and poise. And it might come out a little bit more awkward than you predicted. But if you can take that leap and tell your story, even a part of it, even just a part of it. Yeah, there are people who will hear it and they'll feel sorry for you. I'm not going to pretend that won't happen. That'll happen. You know what? I'll be really honest. There are people who will hear it and judge you for it. Yeah, that will happen. But there are people who will hear it and be healed by it because you told them what they were going through. And now they're less alone. And you're less alone. And as all these stories come out, not in an attention-seeking, exhibitionistic type of way, God forbid, but in a dignified, gentle, caring, careful way, as all of our stories get told, we all heal, our entire people heal, the world heals, and then we look back and we see how all of this was part of a process. It was all part of a process. We are not healed in spite of our wounds. We are healed because of our wounds. Think about it like a pearl. You have a little shellfish. Don't eat it. It's not kosher. A little shellfish, and that shellfish was it called, an oyster or something? Clam. It gets a piece of sand on its tongue. Yuck. Imagine, a little sand on your tongue. It doesn't even have lips, so it can try to spit it out. Just sand on its tongue. And it gets irritated. You know that's how pearls are formed, yeah? So the little grain of sand is on the oyster's tongue, and it gets irritated, and it causes a sore. And that sore brings up a scar tissue, protective tissue. And then that scar tissue gets hard, it becomes rigid, which I'm sure is even more painful. I don't know what kind of a nervous system these clams have, but in theory, if that were going on in my mouth, that would be painful. And then finally it hardens so much it becomes like a stone. And that stone is called a pearl. It's a precious jewel. We all collectively and individually went through the pain. We went through the process. Our generation comes to collect the pearl. None of that pain and suffering was for naught. It's all part of a process that is culminating with us. We're stopping the cycles and we're harvesting the growth and the God consciousness and the love that was the result of everything that we went through. And we're collecting the pearls. So if we went through it all, it already happened. We went through it. Why wouldn't we collect the pearl? And it's beautiful like a pearl. I know it started with sand on a clam's mouth. It started with irritation and with a wound and with a scar. Yes, that's part of the story. It's part of the story. But the end is, it is a jewel. It is your jewel. And it's something to be proud of and to share with others. Then we're going to all put on our jewels. We're going to put on the pearls and adorn ourselves like a bride adorns herself when she meets her groom. Mashiach will be here, and Hashem will reunite with his beloved people. And we'll say, "Where you been so long? We were looking for you." And the whole world will rejoice in this beautiful wedding. And we'll be able to finally come home in this physical world. This world that was the stage for all of our suffering is going to be the place where we will celebrate eternal joy with Hashem and proudly tell our stories. May it be immediately.